Okay, so we are this on Parshas Beshalach. That's in the article on page 367. It is Shemos chapter 13, verse 17. And it begins, it happened when Paro sent out the people that Hashem did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines because it was near. As God said, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war and they will return to Egypt. So Hashem turned the people towards the way of the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds. The children of Israel were armed when they went up from Egypt. Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him, for he had firmly adjured the children of Israel, saying, Hashem will surely remember you, and you shall bring up my bones from here with you. Okay, so the Parsha begins that Hashem did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines because it was near. For Hashem said the people will reconsider when they see a war, they will return to Egypt. The Ramban explains that not everyone was so firm in their faith. They were still somewhat fragile from having been slaves for a really long time, leaving Egypt. And because the land of the Philistines was close to Egypt, and if they went through it, the Philistines would fight against the Jewish people and they would flee back to Egypt. So once again, it continues that he turned them towards the wilderness, to the Sea of Reeds, to go kind of around. And so continuing on in verse 20, they journeyed from Sukkot and encamped in Asam at the edge of the wilderness. Hashem went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them on the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel day and night. He did not remove the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So they had these guides that during the day they followed a pillar of cloud, and at night they followed a pillar of fire. That's how they knew where they were supposed to go. Okay. Okay, so moving on page 369, chapter 14, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel and let them turn back and encamp before Pi-Hahiros, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephon. They shall encamp opposite it by the sea. So he told them they were heading towards the sea, and he told them to turn around and head towards this idol, this temple, the temple of Baal Zephon. And in verse 3, Paro will say of the children of Israel, they are locked in the land, the wilderness has locked them in. I shall strengthen the heart of Paro, and he will pursue them, and I will be glorified through Paro and his entire army. And Egypt will know that I am Hashem, and so they did. So what's this idea of returning to Baal Zephon? So as the Torah explains, it's in order that Paro will say that they're locked in the land, and in order that Paro will chase them, so we'll have this great destruction of the Egyptians at the Sea of Reeds. But why specifically Baal Zephon? Why this idol, and how is this idol still around? We saw in last week's Parsha that at the plague of the death of the firstborn, Hashem said that V'chol Elohei Mitzrayim eseh shvatim, that I'll do justice with all the gods, with all the deities of Egypt. And Hashem destroyed all the Egyptian idols, but left this idol, Baal Zephon, in order that they could have this, in order that Paro could get this idea that he could still catch them. So why specifically Baal Zephon? So there are really two approaches that I saw. One was the Klei Yakar understands that Baal Zephon was the deity that was in charge of money. And remember, the Jews had taken had borrowed vessels of silver and gold and of value from the Egyptians when they went, and as they told Paro that they were going to serve Hashem in the desert for a few days and then come back. And Paro understood that they were fleeing. And he would think that they ended up by this idol because they couldn't get by it, meaning that this idol that protected their wealth was stopping the Jews from escaping. This is the approach that Klei Yakar takes. The Malbim understands that Baal Zephon was their deity of chaos, of maybe Set. It was the Egyptian deity of chaos, of decay, of basically the deity of the wilderness. And they thought, and this was what Paro was supposed to think, and this is what he thought, is that as the Jews are leaving Egypt, leaving the cities and going out into the desert, into the wilderness, now all of a sudden they're stuck. And they're stuck by this idol of Baal Zephon, which he understands to be, once again, the idol of destruction. And this name Baal Zephon literally means the Lord of the North. And there are a lot of Baal idols that you find in the Torah, a lot of like pagan deities called Baal. You find that there's Baal Pa'ar, which was an idol that they worshipped in the desert from the Midianite and Moabite women. There was what was the other one? There's just a regular name Baal, and you find in other places this name Baal Zevuv, which literally would mean Lord of the Flies, which is where the term Beelzebub comes from. It's just a kind of corruption of Baal Zevuv. And these are, and it just means Lord. And so Baal Zephon would mean Lord of the North. And that's, and the North is, according to the Malbim, is the place of the wilderness. So basically, this is the deity of the wilderness. So Paro said when he saw that this idol, first of all, wasn't destroyed like all the others, and that the Jews got stuck by it, that they were running away and they got stuck by this idol. He thought, as the Torah says, that Paro will say that they're locked in the land. They're locked in the land. The wilderness has locked them in, meaning that Hashem was able to have power in the cities, and he was able to beat the Egyptians there. But now that they're out in the wilderness, they're out of their God's element. Once again, Paro, being a pagan, had his worldview was that there are lots of different powers, and Hashem was able to overpower his powers. But outside the city, maybe he wasn't as strong. So they said the wilderness closed them in, and the wilderness has locked them in, that this Baal Zephon is stronger than Hashem outside the cities. So he thought that he could take them. So in verse 5, it was told to the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Paro and his servants became transformed regarding the people, and they said, "What is this that we have done, that we have sent away Israel from serving him?" And then he harnessed his chariot, attracted his people with him, took 600 elite chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with officers on them all. And Hashem strengthened the heart of Paro, king of Egypt, and pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel were going out with an upraised arm. And this really illustrates that if you look back in the end of Parshas Bo, when Paro actually sent them out, it says, this is on page 357. On page 357, it is in Parshas Bo, chapter 12, verse 30, that it says, Paro rose up at midnight, he and all his servants and all of Egypt, and there was a great outcry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was no corpse. And he called to Moshe and Aaron at night and said, "Rise up, go out from among my people, even you, even the children of Israel, go and serve Hashem as you have spoken. Take even your sheep and your cattle as you have spoken, and go and bless me as well." So you see that Paro never actually sent them out to go out permanently. Even after the plague of the firstborn, when he sent them out, Paro sent them out to go and serve your God like you spoke, meaning you asked to serve your God for 3 days in the wilderness. So go and do that. And you could take all your children, all your animals. But he never actually told them that they could go and be free. So now when he saw that they were leaving and that they had no intention of coming back, so now he was going to bring them back. So it continues in verse 9, Egypt pursued them, etc. And on page 371, Paro approached, and the children of Israel raised their eyes, and behold, Egypt was journeying after them, and they were very frightened. The children of Israel cried out to Hashem. They said to Moshe, "Were there no graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the wilderness? What is this that you have done to us to take us out of Egypt? Is this not a statement that we made to you in Egypt, saying, let us be and we'll serve Egypt? For it is better than that we will serve Egypt than we should die in the wilderness." So the Ramban points out in the other commentaries as well, is that there were a lot of things that they did here. At first, in verse 10, it said the children of Israel cried out to Hashem. And then in verse 11, it says they started complaining to Moshe and arguing with Moshe, that they said, aren't there enough graves that you took us out of Egypt? We wanted to stay and you took us out. So the Ramban says that there are different groups here. And there was the righteous groups were the ones who cried out to Hashem. And then there were the less righteous who complained. And in verse 13, Moshe said to the people, do not fear, stay fast and see the salvation of Hashem that he will perform for you today. For as you have seen Egypt today, you shall not see them ever again. Hashem shall do battle for you, and you shall remain silent. And it continues in verse 15. Hashem said to Moshe, "Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them journey forth." So the commentaries say, from this you see that Moshe was crying out to Hashem, and he was davening and extended prayer. And Hashem answered him, "Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them journey forth." Meaning that you shouldn't be davening too long right now. The people need you. Go take them into the sea. So the commentaries ask that, what is Hashem's complaint against Moshe? Isn't that how we react to a time of trouble? When we're in a time of trouble, the first thing we do is we daven. We say Tehillim. We cry out to Hashem. Here, Moshe is doing what you think is the right thing to do. We're in big trouble. We're stuck between the sea and between the Egyptians. And Moshe davens to Hashem, and Hashem says, "What are you doing davening? Go and talk to the people and have them travel." So the Orach Chaim says that usually it's right that the first thing we do is to daven. But in this case, Hashem was telling Moshe that the people did not have the merits to be saved. And like we've said before, that they were assimilated into the Egyptian pagan religion when they were enslaved in Egypt, that the people worshiped the Egyptian deities. And even after going through the Pesach, they still didn't necessarily deserve to be saved from the Egyptians, as the Medrash says, that the angel of the sea said to Hashem that, "Why should I kill the Egyptians and save the Jewish people? They were idolatrous and they were idolatrous." So the Jews didn't deserve to be saved, and to that Hashem told Moshe that sometimes davening does not help. If they won't deserve it, davening doesn't help. What they need is action. And what they need is an act of Mesiras Nefesh, an act of risking their life, and with a demonstration that the word of Hashem is more important to them than their own lives. And if the prophet of Hashem says you should travel, you should start going, so they would start going without thinking about what it means to their life. And that act itself, an act of Mesiras Nefesh, an act of being willing to give up their lives for Hashem, that itself is what allowed them to be saved. And as it continues, that in verse 16, "And you will lift up your staff and stretch out your arm over the sea and split it, and the children of Israel shall come into the midst of the sea on dry land." And this is very interesting that it says, lift up your staff and stretch out your arm over the sea. And there are really two ways to understand that. Was it Rashi? That some understand that to mean that you're lifting up your arm, holding your staff over the sea. But Rabbi Bachia learns that the opposite, that he understands it that what he's actually doing is lift up your staff, meaning put it to the side and hold your hand over the sea without the staff. Because the people, after seeing all the plagues that Moshe had brought about and usually using the staff to bring about the plagues, so the people get an idea that the staff is imbued with like magic powers. It's like a magic wand that brings the plagues. So here Hashem told him, put down the staff and just lift your hand, so the people see that's not the staff that brings the plagues. And it continues in, behold, I shall strengthen the heart of Egypt, in verse 17 on page 371. And they will come after them. I will be glorified through power to his entire army, through his chariots and through his horsemen. Egypt will know that I am Hashem when I am glorified through power in his chariots and his horsemen. And it continues that the angel of Hashem went between the Egyptians and the Israelites and kept them apart. And in verse 12, Moshe, on page 373, verse 12, Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and Hashem moved the sea with a strong east wind all the night. He turned the sea to damp land, and the water split. The children of Israel came within the sea on dry land, and the water was a wall for them on their right and their left. Egypt pursued and came after them, every horse of Pharaoh's chariots, his horsemen, into the midst of the sea. It happened at the morning watch that Hashem looked down in the camp of Egypt and confused them and caused the wheels, they got bogged down in the mud, and the wheels of the chariots came off. And it continues on page 375. Egypt said, I shall flee before Israel, for Hashem is waging war for them against Egypt. And then Hashem said to Moshe in verse 26, stretch out your hand over the sea, and the water will go back upon Egypt, upon its chariots, and upon its horsemen. And that's what Moshe did. Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea towards morning. The water went back its power as the Egyptians were fleeing towards it. And Hashem churned Egypt in the midst of the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots, the horsemen of the entire army of Pharaoh who were coming behind them in the sea. There remained not a one of them. The children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. The water was a wall for them on their right and on their left. On that day, Hashem saved Israel from the hand of Egypt, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great hand that Hashem inflicted upon Egypt, and the people revered Hashem, and they had faith in Hashem and Moshe, his servant. So here the commentaries ask that it says that Israel, in verse 31, Israel saw the great hand that Hashem inflicted upon Egypt, and the people revered Hashem. They had faith in Hashem and Moshe, his servant. Now they had faith in Hashem, and now they feared Hashem. Remember, they had witnessed the 10 plagues in Egypt. And there were already 10 plagues. What was it now that solidified that now they feared Hashem over before? So the Beis Halevi answers that there was a big difference between the destruction of the Egyptians at the sea and the plagues in Egypt. And that was that, like we said, that the Jews in Egypt were somewhat assimilated into the Egyptian culture, especially when it came to idolatry, and that the Jewish people did worship the idols of Egypt. And because of that, they didn't really deserve to be saved, and they didn't deserve the plagues to save them. So when Hashem punished the Egyptians with the plagues, what it really was, it wasn't an act of mercy of Hashem to save the Jewish people. What it was a punishment to the Egyptians. It was Hashem exacting justice on the Egyptians for what they were doing to the Jewish people. And we, the Jewish people, got saved through that as a side benefit. But that wasn't what it was. It wasn't an act of salvation for the Jewish people. It was an act of punishment for the Egyptians, all the plagues in Egypt. But as we said, that there were a few things. First of all, we had we brought the Korban Pesach, we brought the Paschal offering, and like we spoke about last week, the Paschal offering was we took the God of the Egyptians. The Egyptians worshiped the sheep, especially at that time, the month of Nisan, where the zodiac sign for the month of Nisan is Aries, it's the ram, or in Hebrew would be the lamb. So that was what they believed had like special divine power at that moment. And we took that and we slaughtered it and we ate it, which was really completely an act of disavowal of the Egyptian religion, of the Egyptian deities. So we did that. And that was also an act of Mesiras Nefesh. That itself was an act of risking our lives, because when the Egyptians witnessed this, they wanted to tear us apart, but Hashem didn't allow it. And also, like we said, they had this act of walking into the sea with once again an act of Mesiras Nefesh. And the Medrash says that it was Nachshon ben Aminadav, the leader of the tribe of Yehuda, was the one he was the first one. When Moshe said that Hashem says to travel, he got up and started walking into the sea, and he kept on going until the water was all the way up to his mouth and up to his nose, where he couldn't breathe anymore. And that's when the sea split. It took that act of giving up his life, because this is a commandment of Hashem, without thinking about anything, that's what caused the sea to split. And as an aside, we say in Hallel, I actually spoke about this a few weeks ago in reference to Yosef, but it says in Hallel that we say, B'tzeis Yisrael miMitzrayim, when Israel left Egypt, it says, Haisa Yehuda L'Kadshay, that Yehuda was there to sanctify him. Yisrael Mam Shalosav, Yisrael were its leaders, and Hayam Rav Hayanas, the sea saw and it split. So the Medrash says, what did the sea see that it split? It said the sea saw and it split. What did it see? So we spoke about a Medrash a few weeks ago that it saw the coffin of Yosef. But there's another Medrash that says that what it saw was what we just discussed. It saw Haisa Yehuda L'Kadshay. It saw the Yehuda sanctified, that it saw this act of the leader of Yehuda, of Nachshon, that he just walked into the sea, that he followed the commandment of Hashem to travel, even though he was traveling right into the water up to his nose. So that's what the sea saw, and it split. It saw Yehuda L'Kadshay. It saw the leader of the tribe of Yehuda and his people following him, sanctifying Hashem. So at this point, they did deserve to be saved, at least to an extent. They deserved to be saved. So now it wasn't the destruction of the Egyptians at the sea was not an act of punishment, an act of justice for the Egyptians. Instead, it was an act of mercy for the Jewish people. This was Hashem saving the Jewish people. And as a side benefit, the Egyptians were destroyed. So it was the opposite of Egypt, where it was a punishment for the Egyptians, and we benefited from that. Now it's the opposite. This was an act of mercy for the Jewish people, and the Egyptians were destroyed on the side by that act of mercy. And that's what it means here, that the Israel saw the great hand that Hashem inflicted upon Egypt, and the people feared Hashem, revered Hashem, means they feared Hashem, meaning this is the name Hashem, which is used as the name of the where Hashem is acting in a merciful role. And they feared Hashem, acting in mercy, because they saw the great destruction that Hashem's mercy could cause as on the side when Hashem's being merciful to the Jewish people. So moving on. So now they sing a great song of a tremendous inspiration. This is a song of prophecy to Hashem, of praise to Hashem. And there are a number of parts that I'd like to deal with, and kind of briefly, but it'd be in chapter 15 at the bottom of page 375. Begins, then Moshe and the children of Israel chose to sing this song to Hashem, and they sang the following. I shall sing to Hashem, for he is exalted above the arrogant, having hurled horse with its rider into the sea. So here, we're making a statement that Hashem is exalted over the arrogant. That our sages say that a person should always lower themselves and subjugate themselves before Hashem, because someone who's arrogant before Hashem, Hashem will humble them. And he said that there's no arrogant animal more than the horse. The horse is an animal, I guess, that stands straight. It looks very arrogant and proud. And the rider is someone who's riding on top of that. So the cavalry is like the most arrogant person in the army. They're like towering above everyone else. And Hashem threw them off and humiliated them and crushed their arrogance. So, and it continues, the might and vengeance of Hashem was salvation for me. This is my God, I will build him a sanctuary, the God of my fathers, and I will exalt him. And this Hebrew, Zek Keli Vanveo, this is my God, I will build him a sanctuary. It could also be understood, and I think Rashi brings this, that this is my God, and I will beautify him. Where is this? 1 second, let's see the Rashi. Yeah, so this is my God, and I'll beautify it. And this is a source for us that we try to beautify mitzvahs. Like we'll get a beautiful talis bag, rather than just like carrying our tefillin or a talis in a shopping bag. That we try to, surround our mitzvahs with beauty from this verse. And it continues, Hashem is master of war, his name is Hashem, and based upon what we said before, that means that even Hashem, acting in mercy, is a man of war, and his name is Hashem, meaning in spite of how that Hashem is acting in war, his name is Hashem, he's being merciful. And then it continues about how the Egyptians were punished, the Pharaoh's chariots, his army threw into the sea, etc. And Hashem's right hand smashes the enemy. And in verse 379, your abundant grandeur, you shatter your opponents, you send forth your wrath, it consumes them like straw. At a blast from your nostrils, the waters were heaped up straight as a wall stood running water. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. That the blast of your nostrils, meaning it was the wind blew and the water split. And it continues on with this until in verse and about how the Hashem destroyed the Egyptians. And to verse 11, who is like you among the heavenly powers, Hashem? Who is like you, mighty in holiness, too awesome for praise, doer of wonders? And you stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. So now continuing on, now we're pretty much done with talking about the Egyptians. Now we talk about what Hashem's mercy for us. And in verse 13, with your kindness, you guided this people that you redeemed, you led with your might to your holy abode, and that we're headed towards the land of Israel and the place where we'll build the Beis HaMikdash, the temple. And verse 14, people heard they were agitated, terror gripped the dwellers of Philistia, the Philistines. Then the chieftains of Edom were confounded, trembling gripped the powers of Moab, all the dwellers of Canaan dissolved. Which is interesting that the chieftains of Edom and the powers of Moab really had nothing to fear from us, because we weren't commanded to conquer them. They weren't in the land of Canaan, and in fact, we were commanded not to bother them. We were commanded not to bother Edom. That's the descendants of Esau, and he's our relative. He's a son of Abraham, a son of Yitzchak. And we're also commanded not to bother Moab. They're descendants of Lot. But they were also terrified. Just hearing about all this, the great things happened to the Jewish people disturbed them. and all the dwellers of Canaan dissolved because they knew we were coming for them. So there, and remember, we weren't that far away. We wandered in the desert for 40 years, but originally, if not for the sin of the spies, a short time after we received the Torah, and let's say, well, we received the Torah on Shavuos, then Moshe came down with the tablets on the 17th of Tammuz. He broke them because we had sinned, and then we got the second tablets on Yom Kippur. We were a short time after that. We were going to enter the land of Israel. But because we sent the spies and we sinned, that we were wandering for 40 years. So they didn't have a long time. They thought we were coming for them right away. So they were melting. The dwellers of Canaan dissolved. May fear and terror befall them at the greatness of your arm. May there be still a stone. And on page 381, until your people passes through Hashem, until this people you have acquired passes through. And now really the last section in verse 17, you will bring them and implant them on the mount of your heritage, the foundation of your dwelling place that you, Hashem, have made. So now we're talking about the future Beis HaMikdash, the sanctuary, my Lord, that your hands established. So what exactly that means, your hands established? There's a discussion in the commentaries. But one, I think it's, a Medrash says that, it says about that Hashem's hand, it says that Hashem created the world with his hand. That biyada, I don't remember exactly the verse. Yasad Aretz or something along those lines. That Hashem created the earth with his hand. When it discusses the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, it says with your hands. Where am I? My Lord, that your hands established, the sanctuary that your hands established. And did Hashem really build the Beis HaMikdash? We know that in fact. Moshe, with the Jewish people, built it. That we had a mitzvah to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the temple. And so our sages say that the acts, the handiwork of the Jewish people is more precious to Hashem than the creation of the world. Because when Hashem created the world, it said he created it with his hand. But when it talks about what we did, what the Jewish people did, and from the command of Hashem, it calls it the act of his, the handiwork of his hands, plural, that it's more precious to Hashem. Another Madrash says that this is a source for that there will be a third Beis HaMikdash, a third temple, because it calls it the sanctuary, my Lord, that your hands established, and that has not happened yet. Like we said, that the first temple and the second temple, the tabernacles, the first temple, the second temple, were built by the Jewish people. So we have not yet had a sanctuary built by Hashem's hands, and that will be the third temple will be built by Hashem, according to this Medrash. And then the song concludes: when Paro's cavalry came with the chariots, the horsemen into the sea, and Hashem turned back the waters of the sea upon them, the children of Israel walked on the dry land amid the sea. The Ramban says that there are really two ways of looking at this. This could be looked at as the ending of the song, or it could be looked at as a description after the song. And in fact, that's how the Ramban goes, is that this last verse, verse 19, is not part of the song. Yeah. Is not part of the song. You had a question, Alan?
Did I miss a l'chaim earlier?
Yes, you did, but I'll have one just for you right now. But you will be muted, okay. Chaim. So, this last verse, verse 19, when Paro's cavalry came with his chariots, that is not part of the song that they sang at the sea. Instead, it's telling us when did they sing it. And the Ramban explains that it's saying when Paro's cavalry came in with his chariots and horsemen into the sea, and Hashem turned back the water of the sea upon them, meaning while the Jews were still walking the sea, before they even got up on dry land on the other side, or I should say before they even got up on the other side, they were already singing shir, they were already singing the song of praise to Hashem. Then it continues in verse 20, on page 381, that Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took her drum in her hand, and all the women went forth after her with drums and dances. Miriam spoke with them, sing to Hashem, for he is exalted upon the arrogant, having hurled horse with his rider into the sea. And our sages say that where did these drums come from? And our sages say that that because the women understood that another great miracle was going to happen, so they brought drums along to celebrate, because they knew their tambourines, some say that they knew that there was going to be another great miracle, and because of that, they brought drums along to celebrate. So now on page 381, verse 22, is the first big test in the desert. It says, "And Moshe caused Israel to journey from the Sea of Reeds. They went out to the wilderness of Shur. They went for a 3-day period in the wilderness, but they did not find water." And our sages say that really means, what does it mean they went for a 3-day period, did not find water? Our sages say that that water is a reference to Torah, that they went 3 days without studying Torah. And for this reason, it was enacted that we should never go 3 days without reading the Torah in Shul. So that's the reason why we read the Torah on Monday and Thursday and on Shabbos, because that way you never have 3 days in a row without reading the Torah, to ensure that we never go 3 days without Torah study. So then it continues in verse 23. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because they were bitter. Therefore they named it Marah, which means bitter. The people complained against Moshe, saying, "What shall we drink?" He cried out to Hashem, and Hashem showed him a tree. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he established for the nation a decree and an ordinance, and there he tested it. He said, "If you hearken diligently to the voice of Hashem your God and do what is just in his eyes, give ear to his commandments, and observe all his decrees, then any of the diseases that I placed upon Egypt I will not bring upon you, for I am Hashem your healer." So what's the meaning of this incident? So the Kli Yakar explains that they had just gone 3 days without Torah study. So here Hashem was making a point to them that they came to the water and the water was bitter. And Hashem told Moshe to throw a bitter stick, it says an olive branch, into the water, and that sweetened the water. So what does that mean? So he says that they didn't study Torah because to them the Torah was bitter. So meaning, and the Kli Yakar says that's the way Torah is. In the beginning, when a person's first studying Torah, they're not used to it, they don't have a feel for it, they're not educated in it. It's bitter, it's very difficult. And that difficulty could turn people off. Any beginning is difficult, especially when one is beginning to study Torah without any background. It's very difficult. So, and that's the bitterness that's represented by the water. And to that, Hashem told Moshe to throw a stick into it, throw this olive branch into it. That's also bitter, meaning to start studying, start with the bitterness, and the more as you add on more and more, it becomes sweet. That as you learn and become accustomed to the study, so then it becomes sweet. And then as it continues, there he established for the nation a decree and an ordinance, and there he tested it, that he gave them some mitzvahs and some Torah, so they would be able to study.
So is this all oral?
Yes. Yes. And later, actually, it says in Parshas, I believe, Mishpatim, that it might be Kisisa. I always get confused, but I think it's Mishpatim. It says that he actually wrote this down, and the commentaries say what he wrote down was what was taught in Marah, those sections that they learned in Marah. So he did write it down later. So moving on, in verse 27, they arrived at Elim, where there are 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. They encamped there by the water. The Medrash says that 12 springs corresponded to the 12 tribes of Israel, and 70 date palms corresponded to the elders of Israel, the 70 elders. And the Ramban explains that this was arranged from creation, that at this place where the Jews would be traveling and they would stop, there would be a spring for each tribe. Each tribe was able to encamp and have their own spring, and each of the 70 elders had a palm tree to sit under and to be able to study there. So now moving on, in verse 1, they journeyed from Elim. The entire assembly of the children of Israel arrived at the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month from their departure from the land of Egypt. Second. So, and the entire assembly of the children of Israel complained against Moshe and Aaron in the wilderness, that they said, "If only if we have died by the hand of Hashem in the land of Egypt, as we sat by the pot of meat, when we ate bread to satiety, for you have taken us out of the wilderness to kill this entire congregation by famine." They had just used up all their food, all their bread, all the matzah really that they took out of Egypt. Now they had no more food. So they were complaining to Moshe that we're going to all die of famine. And the Ramban points out that at this point, they were in the wilderness of sin. That means that they had left civilization. That until now they were near civilization, and if they needed food, they could buy food. Now they were in the middle of nowhere. They got into the desert of sin. So now they complained, we have no food and no way of getting it. So in verse 4 on page 385, Hashem said to Moshe, behold, I shall rain down for you food from heaven. Let the people go out and pick each day's portion in its day so that I can test them whether they will follow my teaching or not. It shall be on the sixth day when they prepare what they bring. It'll be double what they pick every day. And that is for the Shabbos. And Moshe told them that this will happen. And in verse 8, and Moshe said, when in the evening Hashem gives you meat to eat and bread to satiety, in the morning as Hashem hears your complaint that you complain against him, for what are we? Not against us are your complaints, but against Hashem. Telling them you're complaining against Hashem, Hashem's going to give you bread and meat. The Ramban points out, even though when in the prophecy that it says to Moshe, it doesn't say anything about meat, obviously that was part of the Torah, it gave it briefly, but that was part of what Hashem commanded Moshe, is that there would be meat as well. So in verse 11, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, I've heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them saying, in the afternoon you should eat meat, and in the morning they should be sated with bread, and you should know that I am Hashem your God. It was towards evening that on page 387, verse 13, it was towards evening that the quail ascended and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. The layer of dew ascended, and behold, upon the surface of the wilderness was something thin, exposed, thin as frost upon the earth. The children of Israel saw and said to one another, it is food. That's man, for they did not know what it was. And Moshe said to them, this is the food that Hashem has given you for eating. This is the thing that Hashem has commanded. Gather from it every man according to what he eats, and omer per person according to the number of your people. Everyone according to whatever in his tent shall take. And that's what they did. And in verse 18, they did that, and they measured an omer, and whoever took more had nothing extra. Whoever took less was not lacking. Everyone according to what he eats had they gathered. They followed the commandment of Hashem. And as it says before, this is to see if they follow Hashem or not. The Ramban explains that this made them entirely dependent of Hashem, which we always are. We all are entirely dependent of Hashem. So we are only alive at any moment because that's the will of Hashem. And if Hashem would not will us live, we wouldn't exist. So we are entirely dependent on Hashem, but we have to look to see that. Whereas at this point, there was no hiding it. There was no closing their eyes. There was no facade. It was immediately clear to them that they were entirely dependent on Hashem. Any given day, they never had more food except for Shabbos. They never had more food than they ever needed. And then, so one day the man came down, they got that man, they ate it, they had nothing left for tomorrow. And this was the way it was every single day. So they were entirely, clearly dependent on Hashem. And that was the test of the desert, is that would they trust in Hashem to always have their food. Okay, so in verse 22, it happened on the sixth day that they gathered a double portion of food, 2 omers for each, and all the princes of the assembly came and told Moshe, and he said to them, this is what Hashem has spoken. Tomorrow is a rest day, a holy Shabbos to Hashem. Bake what you wish to bake and cook what you wish to cook, and whatever is left over, put away for yourselves as a safekeeping until the morning. They put it away until morning as Moshe commanded. It did not stink, and there was no infestation in it, which happened for the people who collected extra earlier. For Shabbos, that did not happen, that they had a double portion for Shabbos. And in verse 25, Moshe said, eat it today, for today is Shabbos for Hashem. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days shall you gather it, but the 7th day is a Shabbos. On it there will be none. It happened on the 7th day that some of the people went out to gather, and they did not find. And our sages say this was Dasan and Aviram, who were the big troublemakers in Egypt as well. And Hashem said to Moshe, how long will you refuse to observe my commandments, my teaching? See that Hashem has given you the Shabbos. That is why he gives you on the 6th day a two-day portion of bread. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man leave his place on the 7th day. The people rested on the 7th day. And they called it manna. And in verse 33, it says, Moshe said to Aaron, take 1 jar and put a full omer of manna in it. Place it before Hashem for safekeeping for your generation. That you had a mitzvah to put a jar of manna in the Holy of Holies. And our sages say that in the days of the prophet Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah, he did. The people were not studying Torah, and Yirmiyahu told them, "You have to study Torah." And they said, "But that will negatively affect our livelihood. If we take time to study Torah, that's time that we won't be working. So how will we sustain ourselves? How will we find what to eat?" And Yirmiyahu brought out this jar of man and showed them that your forefathers, your ancestors, spent 40 years in the desert. They didn't work at all for their food, and it fell from heaven every day. Hashem supplied them food. Hashem could supply you food. To illustrate that what this man was, it was a lesson, and it was a lesson that whatever the facade is, whatever it looks like, as hard as we're working and whatever our job happens to be, ultimately what we have comes from Hashem, and all the work and the job is a smoke screen, and it's the mechanism that Hashem chooses to give us what we need. But ultimately, what we have comes from Hashem. Okay, so moving on page 389, the bottom in chapter 17. The entire assembly of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin to their journeys according to the word of Hashem. They encamped in Rephidim. There was no water for the people to drink. And the people contended with Moshe. They said, "Give us water that we may drink." And they complained once again, "Why is it that you have brought us from Egypt to kill me and my children and my livestock through thirst?" So Moshe cried out to Hashem, saying, "What shall I do for this people? A bit more, they will stone me." And in verse 4, verse 5, Hashem said to Moshe, "Pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and in your hand take your staff with which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I shall stand before you by the rock in Chorev. You shall strike the rock, and water will come forth from it, and the people will drink." Moshe did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Masa Meriva because of the contention of the children of Israel and because of the test of Hashem, saying, "Is Hashem among us or not?" So here, do not get confused with a different incident where Moshe was told to speak to the rock and he hit the rock. That's later, and I think Parshas Chukas. Here, Moshe was clearly commanded to hit the rock. That's what he did, and he followed the commandment of Hashem. Why was he commanded to hit the rock with a stick to bring forth water? So the commentaries say, I think Rabbi Bachya says that, like we said by the sea, that he says that he was told to put down the staff because the people thought that the staff was like a magic wand. So what have the people seen with the staff? All the people saw Moshe do with the staff is bring punishment to the Egyptians. So now Hashem was showing them that it's not that the staff isn't something that brings punishment, that brings destruction. Here, it brought them water. It brought them great blessing and bounty, what to drink. Now the Parsha concludes on page 391 at the bottom, verse 8. Amalek came and battled Israel and Rephidim. Moshe said to Yeshua, "Choose people for us and go do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." Yeshua did, and Moshe said to him to do battle with Amalek, and Moshe, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. Hur was Aaron's nephew. It happened that when Moshe raised his hand, Israel was stronger, and when they lowered his hand, Amalek was stronger. Moshe's hands grew heavy, so he took a stone and put it under him, and he sat in it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on this side, one on that side, and he remained with his hands in faithful prayer until sunset. Yeshua weakened Amalek and his people with the sword's blade. And the Parsha concludes, Hashem said to Moshe, "Write this as a remembrance in the book and recite it in the ears of Yeshua, that I shall surely erase the memory of Amalek from under the heavens." Moshe built an altar and called it Hashem is my miracle, and he said, "For the hand is on the throne of God. Hashem maintains a war against Amalek from generation to generation." So what's this whole incident with Amalek? And especially the ending, it's a very cryptic verse. For the hand is on the throne of Hashem. Hashem maintains a war against Amalek. So the Hebrew there, for the hand is on the throne of God. The Hebrew is kiyad al keska. That the word for throne here is case, which a chair, a throne would usually be called kise, a chair. Here it's missing that last letter, the aleph, which would make it kise. Instead it's case. So the Medrash says that Hashem was swearing an oath that as long as Amalek is around, my name is not complete and my throne is incomplete. That's the missing letters to say that its throne is incomplete as long as Amalek exists. So what's the meaning of this whole thing with Amalek, and especially that verse that Hashem's throne is incomplete as long as Amalek is around? So the Netziv explains that it begins in verse 8 that Amalek came and battled Israel and Rephidim. Amalek came, meaning that they didn't just encounter the Jewish people. It's not that the Jews went into Amalek's territory or came close to Amalek. Amalek lived far away. They came from a long distance to fight against the Jewish people. Why is that? Why did they come to fight against the Jewish people? And the answer, he said, is really clear in Kisese, where we also talk about Amalek. That it says, it uses the word Asher Karcha Baderech, that they encountered you on the road. That whereas here it says that they came, which implies they came from a distance. There it says they encountered you. What does that mean? So he says that Amalek were people who believed militantly that there's no divine providence. There's no force controlling the world, and whatever happens is happenstance. Whatever happens is luck or person's input. There's nothing outside of nature pulling the strings. So Amalek hears about everything happening to the Jewish people. They hear the great the destruction of Egypt with the 10 plagues, and that the sea split. All these miraculous things happened, and they couldn't bear that. They couldn't abide that there is this evidence that there is a force controlling nature and controlling the world, intervening in the world from the outside. So they came from far away to do battle against the Jewish people to disprove this, to say that there's no divine providence, there's nothing controlling the world. And that's why Hashem is saying that my name is incomplete and my throne is incomplete as long as Amalek's around, meaning that Hashem's name and Hashem's throne and Hashem's kingdom is, when we say that, like, Hashem's name will, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavarach, that Hashem's great name should be blessed, we're making a statement. We want everybody to recognize Hashem and that Hashem's in control. But as long as Amalek is around, that's lacking in the world. There's a lack of recognition of Hashem's controlling the world, and therefore Hashem's incomplete until Amalek is destroyed. Okay, so now I wanted to say a little bit about the Haftarah. Haftarah is on page 1152. It is the Song of Devorah. It's the longest Haftarah of the year. And it begins, it's 1152 in the Art Scroll. It's from Shoftim, from Judges, chapter 4, verse 4. It begins that Devorah was a prophetess, and she was the judge of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people were being subjugated by Sisera, who was a general of Yavin, who I believe was an Amorite king, and who he had a mighty army. And Devorah went to Barak, who was from Naphtali, and told him that, come and you're going to lead the Jews to battle against Sisera. And Barak said, I won't go unless you do, because he said that the people, he thought the people would not necessarily rally around him, but they would have been around Devorah, that the people, if Devorah went, the people would follow. And in verse 9, she said, I will surely go with you, except that the path upon which you go will not be for your glory, for Hashem will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Then Devorah stood up and went with Barak to Kadesh, and they brought an army from Zebulun and Naphtali, and Sisera had this mighty army, and they fought against Sisera, and Hashem confounded Sisera, it says, and they destroyed him. And then in verse 17, it says that Sisera fled on foot to the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite. So who was Heber the Canaanite? He was mentioned before. He was a descendant of Yisro. And Yisro was a convert. So he was not from any tribe. So because he was not from any tribe, so he wasn't given a portion in the land of Israel, which was divided amongst the tribes. So the people in the land of Israel allowed him to live amongst them, but he didn't have his own portion. But because of that, Sisera thought that he would provide him shelter because he wasn't from any of the tribes of Israel. So he went to Yael, to the wife of Heber the Canaanite, and there was peace between them. And Yael went out towards Sisera, and the Gemara says that Sisera seduced him to make him exhausted, to tire him, and he asked for water, and she gave him milk to make him tired. And then as he was sleeping, she took a tent peg and a hammer. She didn't take a knife or anything, because if she approached him with a knife and he woke up, he would recognize what was going on. So she took a tent peg and a hammer. So if she saw him carrying that towards him, she would think that he was just fixing the tent, and she hammered into his head, into his temple, and pierced the ground, and he died. And And finally Barak got him and got there, and Yael showed him that, look, in fact, I killed Sisera. And in verse 23, and on that day Hashem subjugated the Yavin, king of Canaan, before the children of Israel. The hand of the children of Israel had become progressively harsh over Yavin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Yavin, king of Canaan. So they gradually took control after that victory until they destroyed him. And then, and this is the parallel to this Parsha, is that Devorah sang a prophecy, a prophetic song, just like we had in the Torah, the Az Yashir. Devorah herself sang this prophetic song to Hashem. Okay, and just 1 second, Alan. And the Haftarah concludes. That in verse 31, so may all your enemies be destroyed, Hashem, and let those who love him be like a powerfully rising sun. And following this, the land was quiet for 40 years. So Devorah was able to bring about this victory and bring 40 years of peace to the Jewish people, which was a big percentage. Until the building of the temple, I don't remember the number. I think it was like 310 years. I'm probably way off with that, but it was 300 some odd years until they built the first Beis HaMikdash, and until Shaul was made king, until they had their first king, was some 300 odd years. So 40 years is a significant amount of peace that was brought about through Devorah. Okay, Shkoyach, have a great Shabbos. Shkoyach, let me close this up.